Chapter 23, Facility Design, Layout, and Organization. Okay, this chapter and the next one, make sure you pay close attention to all the information given in here. Okay, this one's going to be going over how you design a facility layout, kind of organization. And the reason why, well, this is important is one, is if you ever want to be in a facility or run one, you need to kind of understand all the different parts of what goes into the facility layout and the organization of a building. But also for those, which is most of you, having to go and take the EPC test when you get into internship, there's a lot of questions around this topic right here and the next one, chapter 24. Okay, both of those, there's be a lot of those questions on the EPC exam. So that's why we're covering it. Well, one, it's important, but also you're going to be tested on this when you take the EPC. Just like when I took my CSCS, there's a lot of questions that was on that exam from these layout for this chapter, from the layout chapter, and the next one going over policies. Okay, so just make sure you know it. I know it's the business part of this may not be the most exciting to you, or might be kind of hard to kind of follow it, but just make sure, just go through the definitions, know what it is we talked about, and then through here. And like I said, this will be on the EPC when you get into internship and take that certification exam. Chapter 23, Facility Design, Layout, and Organization. The objectives here: identify the aspects of a new facility design, including the 4 phases: pre-design, design, construction, pre-operation. Identify the aspects of modification of an existing facility, along with the differences between design of a new facility and modification of renovations of an existing facility. Explain how to assess an athletic program's needs in order to design a facility that is well suited to the needs. Explain how to design specific facility features, including supervision location, access, ceiling height, flooring, environmental factors, electrical service, and mirrors. Explain how to arrange equipment in organized groups, creating better traffic flow through the facility. Explain the maintenance and cleaning needs for the surfaces and equipment in the strength and conditioning facility. Okay, there's a lot that kind of goes into building up a new program, a new facility, and it really is important that you take all these necessary precautions, these necessary steps, because it's going to add into the overall flow of the facility itself. Okay, the biggest thing you need to make sure of is, when you're looking at it, is that flow may not seem important right now, but it's not until you're actually in a room that has a bad organization and you're trying to shuffle athletes through and coach them, do you realize how important it is, how everything's designed has a huge impact upon how you can coach. Okay, if things are properly laid out, set apart and designed in a way that allows you to be able to continue coaching, because at the collegiate level, per coach, you're going to have multiple athletes you could be watching at once, upwards to 20. And so you need to make sure that there is a good design, a good flow to this room, because when you have 20 people you're trying to look over, you need to make sure that everything can keep going at an orderly fashion. Okay, so I know this stuff is not the most exciting, but it is important to the overall functionality of a strength and conditioning facility. So the general aspects of a new facility design: 1, make sure you form a committee of professionals to planning and designing a new strength and conditioning facility. And this is really important, that you have a committee that has all on the same page in terms of the same goals. Okay, you need to make sure that this committee has enough professionals on there, especially having a strength and conditioning person on that committee is really important. A lot of times when designing up these facilities, they tend to at times exclude a strength and conditioning professional. Well, they're the ones that know how everything operates. They know the X's and O's of a facility. So it's important when you're forming a committee that you have at least one person on there that's well respected, that has the credentials that be able to give valuable input to the design and operation of the facility being built. And then here's just the different phases of the new facility. We're going to go through each of them. So you have the pre-design phase, design phase, construction phase, and pre-operation phase with all the extra, the parts within each of those phases. We're going to go through all of those. So beginning with pre-design phase. It says this phase should consist of a needs analysis, feasibility study, and a formation of a master plan. So the needs analysis is basically getting designers and experts and everyone together to go overall to discuss what is the needs of the athletic program. Once you just get upon that, what is the actual needs then of the facility? Okay, there's going to be a lot of bolts, nuts and bolts about this part, such as, well, how much space do you need? And then obviously the cost. Okay, because everyone wants to have as much as they possibly can within the new facility, but especially a lot of colleges, well, we see it with where we're at, we don't have a lot of extra space to be building new buildings. So a lot of times you're working with an existing facility, and so your space is limited. Okay, so if you're trying to build something onto a new, remodeling, well, type deal, adding on to what's already there, well, you're limited by space. And even if you want to build a new facility, once again, space is going to be limited, and how much the costs are going to be limited as well. Okay, so within this, you need to be able to design up what's the needs, what's the feasibility, and then really seeing, all right, what is it we could build, how much can we spend, and then once you get that formulated, then you kind of get the needs of what is actually going to go into the facility itself. Within that feasibility study, you really have to utilize the SWOT analysis. I'm sure you've probably heard of that, SWOT. So the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And really the goal of all that is to formulate, because you're going to have people investing into this. So you need to get it says like a master plan together. That a master plan is basically the overall plan of all phases at once leading up to the opening of the new facility. So with that, you need to make sure that you're looking at the strengths, the weaknesses, opportunities, threats, getting how much it's going to cost, the needs of the facility, getting that all together, making sure everyone's on the same page, and getting as much input as possible. That way you could see the fruition of this new facility, because these facilities, and why we're going over, because it does add to the overall ability to train the athletes. Okay, most of your big programs already have phenomenal strength and conditioning facilities. You could just go Google any top football program in the nation. They got some video that that they go through and look at the facilities. It is a recruiting tool, but also it is important for the athletes to make sure you have a good program. A good facility. A place where they can actually get good training in. Doesn't have to have every piece of equipment, but you need to be able to have enough to be able to train the athletes effectively and be able to get stuff done. Okay, you can't just have one or two barbells and some mixed match plates laying around and expect to be able to have a good program from that. Okay, so these are important, and it's important that you get a well thought out plan to be able to provide for the athletes all that they need. And then within pre-design, you see hiring an architect. Okay, make sure they talk about in the book, and this should be a no-brainer, but get somebody who has experience and has a good reputation. We say that's a no-brainer. Of course you want to hire the best person, but you'd be surprised at how many times places will save a few bucks by hiring an unqualified designer, architect, and then things kind of go bad. And you want to get someone that kind of sees the vision. That's why it says with previous experience in the strength and conditioning industry, someone who knows how to work within this area, because there's going to, like I said in the intro a little bit, there's a flow to a program, to the facility. You make sure that there's good access, good flow, and things kind of make sense of how they're designing it. This is not the time to be, I mean, yeah, they're going to design it up to make it look really cool, I guess, but this is not something to be trying out new designs in terms of the flow and the access to the facility. So you need to get someone who knows about strength and conditioning, knows about the needs of this profession to get design up a proper facility for the athletes. Then you move into the design phase. So this is the committee's ideas come together with regard to the facility structure and design elements. So the pre-design is basically getting everything set up, getting on top of where we're going to be at, and then you move into the actual design. This is where everyone's working together to try and bring about, you know, the facility and what's going to be within it. And then it says it's extremely important to plan around the flow of the facility with adhering to all relevant regulations and codes. Okay, we'll talk about those, kind of come up in a bit, but just make sure that, you know, you are adhering to whatever the local codes are, building codes and all that. And this should just be something that, once again, if you have a proper architect, proper designers, they should know about. Then you go construction phase. So this is the longest period or longest phase of the operations here. It says keeping on the project on track in relation to the deadline must become a priority. This is probably one of the biggest headaches that if anyone's ever worked in the construction industry and you know about, well, things usually always take a lot longer than what they initially set as a deadline. And things usually always end up costing a little bit more than what you originally planned for. So that's why, you know, it is important in the pre-design to be practical about what you're trying to do, because things usually, there's always problems come about with construction. There's always an issue. Things take longer and cost more a lot of times. Okay, and so just know that it says delays must result in the loss of potential revenue and possible lawsuit. That's the last thing you want to have happen, is being at a point where you have to get involved in any kind of legal issues. In the pre-operation phase, this is just finishing the interior decor, hiring the staff, planning for staff development, planning so that opening the facility is easy, planning for organization of administrative and clerical duties. Those who work in the rec center or have worked in the gym realize how important all of these are. You know, if you've ever worked in the gym, you know how important it is to have the right staff that's taking care of just the day-to-day needs, cleaning the equipment, helping out with patrons, moving things around, and just whatever the case might be. And it's important that you have an operating staff that really is putting forth the best effort. Okay, especially then when you're working with, you know, it's a little bit different working from the general population to working with the elite athletes. Okay, things really need to, I'm not saying one's more important than the other, but, you know, if you're working with elite athletes, that's a lot of times that's big money right there, and future big money. So you need to make sure everything's taken care of and cleaned and operating as efficiently as possible. And that only comes by hiring the right individuals. Okay, then if you're doing you're adding on addition to a strength and conditioning facility. So it says a strength and conditioning professional should assess existing equipment based on the needs of all athletes and teams who use the facility. A lot of times, I mean, unfortunately, a lot of gyms, even Division I, need to be modified. I know LSU finally just updated theirs within the last few years, but you'd be surprised that when I was there, it was not as they need to keep up with, you know, Alabama, A&M, these other schools who have made massive additions to their existing facilities. And so LSU finally kind of stepped up a little bit too, but these schools, these are big recruiting tools for a lot of athletes. I think, in my opinion, it's a little bit excess, how much goes into what they're doing now. A lot of glitz and glamour, I guess you could say, that goes into these new facilities. Okay, in terms of making sure every locker has a TV above it, and making sure, Well, at least for football, making sure that there's, scent controlled little cubbies for their equipment. And, it could go on and on and on. You just have to Google, like I said, just go YouTube some of these facilities and you'll see what I'm talking about. But nonetheless, it's recruiting, it's money. So that runs the world, unfortunately, a lot of times. But if you're going to update an existing facility, these are the steps that you'd go through. Okay, so first steps, obviously get a committee, go through the feasibility and need analysis, just like what we talked about for a new facility. Second step, create a plan, and then you go through remodel and our upgrade and final designs and decorations. Third step, arrange equipment, create employee duties and schedule, and hire, keep staff. So they're kind of very similar. It's just going to be a little bit different because you're adding on, which does add some of its own headaches, trying to add on to what's already there. But anyways. So when you're assessing a program, there's a lot of questions that should be answered. And a lot of times programs, or I should say facilities usually they have way more than they actually need, and sometimes they may not have enough. But anyways, you really need to be answering these questions in order to go through, adding on or even building something. How many athletes will be using a facility? Okay, a lot of, like at LSU, before I left, there's 2 weight rooms, one in Tiger Stadium and one next to the football practice field, which was across from Tiger Stadium. And so the football one had football, gymnastics, beach and regular volleyball, golf, and women's soccer, I believe, all using that weight room. And the one in Tiger Stadium had men and women's basketball, track, softball, and that's and baseball was in the football weight room because that's who I work with. I can't believe I forgot that. Baseball is in the football, or the football, next to the practice football field. Okay, so you look at 2 weight rooms amongst all those sports. Okay, that's a lot of athletes using a lot of wear and tear on the equipment. And sadly enough, at the time, LSU was one of the only schools in the SEC and one of the major powerhouses of collegiate baseball for the last, almost 30 years now, was the only baseball program not to have their own weight room. Okay, a lot of these top programs each sport has their own weight room. And you got to think, if you have, 50 plus guys for football, and then you have, 30 guys for baseball, women's soccer, I don't know how many, and then volleyball, you're having in, just to say, altogether, the sports within, maybe, 150, 200 athletes in one weight room, and probably right around 100 in the other weight room. Well, that's a lot of athletes going in and using the facility. So you really need to make sure, okay, when you're going to program, look at a facility, well, how many athletes are going to be using it? And then it says, what are the training goals of athletes, coaches, and administration? Okay, that changes because each sport's a little bit different. Okay, what are the demographics? Okay, a little bit different. Each sport is a little bit different. And of course, what will the training experience of the athletes be? Okay, this one, a lot of these questions I should be saying, I keep talking about collegiate, but this could also be looked at as, at a high school program, looking at assessing as well. Okay, professional as well, there, but usually pros tend to have already what they need, I guess. But, if you're looking at a high school, and I'll show you here in a few slides about what the facility's kind of layout should be. But, if you're having different training experience of athletes, well, how are you going to assess the program there? What kind of equipment you're going to have for each one? And so there's a lot that goes into thinking about is it high school, collegiate, or what? Will the athletes be scheduled, or how will they be scheduled? Okay, you look at at LSU, I keep using that example, but, we would have baseball has to go early. A lot of those big programs, football takes precedent. If a lot of athletes are using a weight room, football always takes a precedent. I'm not saying that's right, but, football is the big money maker for most programs, so it is what it is. And so Baseball, we'd have to train at like 5:30. Forget what time we'd go, because football was in at 7. So you make sure we're done, cleaned up, out, so football could come in and train. Everything's usually working around football in these big programs if a lot of athletes are using a weight room. But nonetheless, you need to make sure that athletes are being scheduled properly. Okay, you can't have a small weight room and having 2 sports in there at one time. And then what equipment needs to be repaired or modified? Okay, things are going to break down. Things are going to fall apart. You're going to have to repair, you're going to have to fix. How's that going to be assessed? Especially a lot of times if you have limited budget. Okay, there's going to be limited money coming in, so what are you going to do? Well, a lot of times you kind of got to figure out how to fix it yourself. So, okay, location. Says the facility should be ideally located on the ground floor away from offices and classrooms. You need to have accessibility, see at the bottom, for those who have any kind of disabilities. Okay, make sure they can assess that. So that's why you have it on the ground floor. And also, you don't want to be dropping weights on the second floor, because more than likely it'll go through the floor. So needs to be on the ground floor. It says away from offices and classrooms. That way, things are quiet. Weight rooms, they crank up the music, weights are dropping, people are yelling. It gets crazy. Supervision should be in a central location of the facility with clear line of sight and mirror, providing the opportunity to look out and see everyone. Okay, even in any kind of weight room, whether this is a strength and conditioning facility, the rec center, any kind of gym, there's always a supervisor, always located where they can see everyone. That way they can respond to emergency as soon as possible. And like I said, access, you make sure that you have accessibility into the facility with any kind of disabilities. So you need a wheelchair ramp or a lift. It says in order for anyone, or a wheelchair lift for any change in height exceeding half an inch. So really, you need to make sure that the facility is very accessible for those with any kind of disability. And the ramp run should be 12 inches for every 1 inch rise. That means every 12-inch span, it should only rise 1 inch. So you have a slow, not a very steep ramp going up. It needs to be something where somebody could actually, with a wheelchair, if they're by themselves, and it's a manual wheelchair, they're able to get themselves into the facility without having to be pushed up the ramp. Make sure they have some kind of rough strip so they prevent people from falling. Ceiling height. Says it should be high enough for jumping or explosive activities. Says this includes the athlete's height plus the space required for box jumps, vertical jumps, or Olympic lifts. Recommended height is 12 to 14 feet. Most places have, they're giant rooms, so you don't have to worry about height, but just make sure that it's enough to where people can work out without hitting themselves on the ceiling. Make sure flooring, this seems like you don't really pay attention to this, but go lift in a place that has, slippery flooring or something bad. You'll know real fast how important that is. So it's usually a rubber flooring is the best. You can do indoor turf, something that's going to be, gripping, but it says like antifungal as well. Make sure something that's, safe, antifungal, but something that's not too slippery, that something can actually grip on when you're working out. The platforms should be made of wood, which that's the only thing that should be wood in the weight room that allows for just the proper movements. Environmental factors should include a lot of artificial and natural light. Ideally, natural light. Most weight rooms have giant windows, allow a lot of natural light coming in, and then it tells you the lumens. So not too bright, but make sure it's bright enough. Temperature, comfortable, 68 to 78 degrees Fahrenheit. And relatively low humidity. So electrical service, it says more requirements, more outlets than most buildings do. That's because you need a lot of equipment to plug things in. And they will require higher voltage. If you know about that, you're just not going to need a little 120. You probably need a something higher than that. 120 is usually what's plugs into the wall for most outlets. But you'll need something that can handle, these big equipments. Okay, so stair climbers, elliptical machines, treadmills, so forth. Mirrors, place at 6 inches from any equipment and a minimum of 20 inches above the floor. Other considerations, make sure you have drinking fountains located within the training area and having some kind of way for athletes to clean themselves up. That's just a hygiene factor. Allows them, especially with where we're at right now with COVID, make sure that you have ways to limit the spread of diseases and infections. Okay, equipment placement, group things together. If you've ever been in a weight room that has no organization, it will drive you nuts, especially if you're like me who has extreme OCD. I like everything to be neat, nice, and organized. Make sure you have everything grouped together based upon the type of workout it's accomplishing, whether it's free weights, cardio machines, stretching area, whatever. Free weights racks organized along the wall. Make sure there's walkways through it all. That way there's a safe, easy flow. You don't want to, preventing congestion and maximizing space for more use. Cardio machines should be in their own section, organized and grouped together. So treadmills together, ellipticals, machines together, and so on. Barbells and dumbbells should have a minimum of 36 inches of space between them to allow between movement racks without danger to lifters and or spotters. Traffic flow is heavily influenced by equipment placement. You ever been in the gym on a Monday afternoon, about 4 or 5 o'clock? Every single dude's located right next to a bench because they're all benching. Okay, so make sure you have a way to kind of keep, congestion down as much as possible. Since most facilities are one big room, and walkways can be created by manipulating the arrangement of the equipment. Most do a good job, but I'm telling you, if you've ever been in a weight room that's just kind of thrown it all in there together, it drives my OCD crazy. Okay, stretching warm-up area should have at least 49 square feet of open space so athletes can perform a dynamic warm-up. And it should be big enough that multiple people can use the area at the same time. Free weights, I already said that, but should line along the wall with enough room to walk between the wall and the weights, and at least 36 inches between ends of racked bars. Kettlebells should be lined up under a dumbbell rack or in their own section. These are movements are dynamics to take up a lot of space, so make sure there's a large enough area for them to be working out in. Weightlifting area. This is going to be for anything for your Olympic lifts and squats. So racks and platforms should have enough room between them, so if someone were to fall, people nearby would not be injured. Should have 3 to 4 feet of walk space between them. And the weightlifting standards or racks should be bolted to the floor to ensure that it does not move when in use. Your circuit area. So circuit training is where you allow your machines. So it's, designed, of course, for the machine work to be doing, high reps, low weight, kind of going from machine to machine, but you need a lot of space for that, ample space because there's a lot of people moving through there. It should be placed at least 24 inches, preferably 36 inches apart, in order to provide adequate walking space and some extra space for safety, basically safety cushion. It says any design walkways in the circuit training area should be between 4 and 7 feet wide to provide enough area to move freely. And aerobic area, your machines should be in their own section. It should be organized such that the treadmills, elliptical machines, stair machines, and bikes are grouped together. And you can see the space needed per machine right there. So one bike, you need 24 square feet. And so, and the stair steppers, how much you need right there kind of shows you roughly the amount of machine or space you need for the equipment there. So here's 2 examples, one weight room for secondary school and then one for university. Of course, university is going to be much bigger because you have a lot more athletes coming in there, but also the coach, you could, as a strength and conditioning coach, you're able to watch more athletes. So as in college, it's one coach per 20 athletes, where high school, it's one per 15. So that's why your secondary school, well, you're going to have less space because you need to be the coach needs to be able to watch. You're going to have less athletes and be able to really focus on the athletes while they're lifting. And plus, a lot of times too, your high schools are not going to have that much money, so you need to optimize as much space as possible. And so your university is going to have way more money, way more space. You have way more athletes at a time per coach. And so, but you can see the general layout's pretty close. Okay, you have the Olympic lifting, the racks along the walls, dumbbells along the walls as well. And you can kind of see everything's organized in the way. They're all very similar. It's just a matter of one's bigger, one's smaller, and then just the equipment. But nonetheless, they follow the same flow, I guess. Okay, these are just checklists for cleaning floors. Just make sure to read through these. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. Just check for cleaning floors. Check for any problems on the floors. Make sure on the walls and the ceilings. Okay, it's important to make sure everything's working properly. It costs way more to have to go back and just do it. That's why I always like to stress is just do things right the first way, and it'll help keep things going. When you ignore problems, well, that's when something eventually goes wrong down the road. It costs way more at that point. Okay, so just check and clean for all this. Appearance is really important, especially when you have recruits coming in. You have at these collegiate levels, you have so many people coming in doing business of some kind. You want to have a presentable place. Every Friday before home football games, the weight rooms at LSU looked amazing because all the coaches would go through and line up all the weights, make sure everything looks proper. You need to make it look like you're ready to take a picture for a magazine kind of deal. Okay, because it's presentation, and so it's really important to make sure things are lined up, looking well, and just presentable for anyone who's coming in to the weight room. Okay, as you see from this, there's a lot that goes into designing up a new facility. Okay, you have to get the initial design, and then you go through. Well, you need to do the needs analysis, the pre-design. Then you do the design. Then you go through the construction and the the opening. And so with all that right there, there needs to be some kind of flow going through, and some kind of proper accessibility flow through a facility, because you're gonna have a lot of athletes coming in and out. These weight rooms are busy, and there's tons of people coming, using it. There's tons of people coming and going. It's crazy a lot of times. And so that's why when it goes into the pre-design, make sure you go over the needs. What is it that the weight room needs to accomplish? Obviously, you need to invest some money into it because, well, you got to have money to operate, of course. But you don't want to go too low and not have, enough. Okay, and so when you're designing all these up, just make sure that, you put a lot of thought into what's going on. There's a lot of planning, get a lot of good minds coming in, a good committee that's really going to design up a proper weight room for the athletic program, for the school, or wherever this is being built. Okay, and so there's just some things that go into this. Make sure you know those different parts we talked about, the different phases, and just really know all the parts that goes into organizing a weight room, the layout, weight benches, where the equipment should be, mirrors, cardio equipment, all that. Just know the general idea, know those things of where everything should be located within the weight room. And they really do kind of follow, whether it's a strength and conditioning facility or a general fitness gym, high school weight room. All of them are going to follow the same basic structure and organization and layout. So just make sure you know all those. Make sure you know all this for this exam. And like I said, but then also pay close attention, because a lot of this will be on the EPC exam as well. When you get into internship, that's you'll take that then.